on impreg. I am so unbelievably damp right now. I'm so damp because of Resident Evil. No, I rushed from a class before here to do my recording stuff, and we did like field sampling in a creek, and I'm just sitting uncomfortably with damp pants and socks and shoes. But anyways, hi. Hello there. Welcome to Surviving This Horror. It's a podcast where I really just rant about horror games and why they're cool and they're epic and why I like them a lot. I'm Lily, and I will be your host through this interesting podcast. To summarize it, really, it's just each episode I'll talk about a specific game and talk about like the timeline, culture, legacy, impact has on pop culture and has on the, what's the fancy word? The cultural zeitgeist, if you will, my lady. But yeah, I also want to give a big thanks to WIUX for sponsoring and assisting in this production of this podcast. I really appreciate it, and I'm very, very excited for this very first episode. And like I said prior, this very first episode is going to be about Resident Evil. And Resident Evil, of course, is just the grandpappy of all survival horror video games. I would say horror video games in general, but in the genre alone. But what do I mean when I say survival horror? What does that term actually mean? It's a subgenre of horror, and specifically gameplay style in video gaming, where the elements of surviving, if you could have guessed, are just extremely limited due to the limited resources and tense environment surrounding a game or scene or whatever. But there are two main factors to what makes a survival horror video game survival horror. It's first the limited resources, like I just stated. It's the lack of bullets, lack of weapons, lack of healing items. In this case, it's definitely like healing resources like herbs in Resident Evil, ammo, especially ammo for like really powerful weapons. They're all extremely limited, which adds a sense of scare to the player, because that scare and fear comes from, oh shit, what if I'm fighting a boss and I run out of bullets? That's wonderful. But the second major aspect is the puzzling, which is like really, really, I don't think if I were to describe it, is like very obvious, but like mazes, puzzles, problem solving, Sudoku, crossword, the Wordle, whatever. They are a very common string in survival horror games, and definitely in Resident Evil. Whether those puzzles be like really like high IQ, like super hard to like matching, matching 2 plus 2, does it equal 4 or does it equal 5? Yeah, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because survival horror, the first franchise to even like blow up these two main points in horror gaming, was Resident Evil. I can't do the voice. If you played any of the games, especially the older ones, they have like a really dark, gravelly voice that opens in the title sequence. Resident Evil. Maybe I can get Resident Evil. I can't. I sound like a 4-year-old trying to intimidate their mom in Walmart to buy them ice cream for dinner. Like, that's what I sound like. I don't. Trust me, the impression is spot on. But, like I was saying, Resident Evil was the first major franchise in the West, at least. In the West, most predominantly. And by West, I mean, like, America, the States, stuff like that. To really pioneer survival horror gameplay mechanics and that skill and resource management. And like I said earlier, this all creates a new type of fear that's almost exclusive to gaming itself, that you're scared and stressing over preserving your resources and having to find more, that it creates that pressure and fear that if you fuck up and you like waste all your bullets because you panicked, then you're screwed, and you could be screwed for a very long period of undetermined time. But now, at least in all these podcasts, I'm gonna try and give like a very shitty, poorly done, short, like maybe like 3-sentence bio of how the game came to be, just by like looking at the Wikipedia or like using my own knowledge. Because there's like, especially with the franchise as big as Resident Evil, my ass is not going to go in a deep dive because I'm lazy. Sorry. In short, Resident Evil, or in Japan, where the game is programmed and made from, whatever, they call it Biohazard. I'm not too sure why they changed the name, and it definitely gets more confusing when I get to another point. But it was made in the early 90s by Capcom, but it was made specifically by Shinji Mikami. I hope I didn't butcher that too well. Who was the grandfather of survival horror gaming. He, like, in my opinion, he made a whole bunch of, like, gaming archetypes, and so on, that, like, you see predominant today and throughout, like, the history of horror video games, which basically starts in 1993, basically. 1993 to today. It's a very long history. But Capcom came to him to produce another horror game and another game involving elements from his previous works and previous horror games, because they were big hits in Japan specifically, and their main focus was to make a shit ton of money because of this new emerging audience and moneymaker market in the West, where they would just eat anything up. And they saw he's been making hit after hit, new innovations, so we're just like, we want you to be in charge of this little project. And a few years later, the game was created. The first game, Resident Evil, was first created and released on the Sega Saturn, which was kind of surprising to me. I thought it was released on something else when I was looking this up. I thought it was not the GameCube, because that's much later. But I didn't realize it was released like first originally on the Sega Saturn. And of course, they got like ported to other stuff, but I was like, nobody fucking used that thing even at the time. And that was the birth of the Titan that we have today. It is a huge monster in the gaming industry alone, and the crazy media alone, not even just like video games. But yeah, and and this has to do with like how influential it is on the West, and like the West's, this is a side tangent about how, like, I think the way other countries take media, like for example movie posters, and change them is like really interesting and like very like strange, especially when it comes to America, where they change the posters and advertising for Resident Evil games, especially like the first handful of them, like the first 3, it to like the most ridiculous shit ever. I wish I could like show this visually. But like especially in Japan, like the Japan poster box art for the first game is this like really creepy eyeball with like, it almost looks like raptor claws to me, but I think they're supposed to be zombie claws tearing it away. It's simple, it's effective, it's show don't tell, but it's still like scary and like draws the consumer in. However, in the States, we like completely rubbed away all this charm and everything that it had to like the most bare bones, goofy, cartoony shit ever. And I know this definitely goes deeper into like how, like I said earlier, about how different audiences are influenced by the culture surrounding them, but the box art for the first game is just so bad. It goes from this like scary eyeball, like I was saying, to what America did was this like Joe Schmo action figure like type character, type body build, like 80s action figure, if you can imagine that, with a bulging eyeball with his eyebrow like looking like eyebrow up, and he's supposed to be like scared, nervous, but like I can't even tell what it's like. It's supposed to be Chris, by the way, Chris Redfield, but it also, Chris Redfield has so many different renditions, but this doesn't even look like the Chris Redfield at all. He just looks like some like, His eyes are bugging out. He looks like perplexed, scared, looked like he shit his pants. Like I think the emotion they were going for was fear and scare, but it just looks wrong. Like it looks like very strange. And I just highly encourage you to look it up. To me, it's comedic. It almost looks like someone put like a shitty like TikTok looks maxing filter over him and then made him like look perplexed. I don't even know how they did it or like why they got the idea for. I don't know. It's hilarious. Okay, now that you got like a little tidbit of a background, I wanted to speed run the franchise and its like eras, especially with a franchise so big and girthy. Like my cock. Sorry. So, it's lived through a lot of decades, like the 90s, early 2000s, 2010s, onward. And you could see that influence. In my opinion, the timeline of the series is described from like the beginning era. It's like good and spooky, and then it goes to good and spooky, but now it's action-based. Now it's all gun-ho, guns blazing, but it's still a little bit scary and like pretty good. And then it just goes to bad, dog shit, losing its spark, the divorcing from its name because the marriage lost its spark, to not even scary at all. Like there's no ounce like of, it's just like all action and like with the Resident Evil name slapped on it. Yeah. And during this period there was like the really bad Mila Djokovic, I think that's how you say her. But there's like really bad movies that came out that also just show how like if you put the IP on anything, people will buy it and then watch it and be dog ass. To now we're in this era where it's like remake time, remaster time, but also we're still getting like we're finally back. We're so back with the scariness. So phase 1 of this timeline I'm talking about is the pop-off period that I wrote on my script, which I now saying it out loud don't really like it, but these are like the early games. So in 1996 was the first game when it got published. It was that's another thing I forgot to mention. So I had a couple of friends help me write these like shitty sentences, but since there's so many and I don't want to go in depth with every single game because it's just so crazy. I had me and my friends come up with one sentence, like funny descriptions to describe each game in one sentence. And I did this like a couple weeks ago and I haven't looked back at it now and I'm a little worried. But in 1996, Resident Evil, the first game, came out and I had that described as Haunted Mansion. Psych, it's not haunted, it's Zombie Manor, starring Jill Sandwich. 1998, second game, Blonde Bombshell and Woman Number 1, or woman number 2 in this case, go to a Disney-like owned pharmaceutical-owned city, and then it explodes. 1999, third game, Resident Evil 3, Nemesis. Stars. That one was better. Nemesis is the giant monster. He's the botched circumcision monster who chases after Jill Sandwich and said exploding Disney Corpo pharmaceutical city. But he has a funny deep voice, and he only knows how to say one word, which is stars. 2000, Code Veronica. I wrote Zombies in Paris by Kanye West. I kind of, because it takes place in France, I guess. 2002, Resident Evil 0 came out. It stars a underage nurse. No, that's not a porn title. And she helps a man with a bad tribal tattoo. And now we're on to phase 2. This is like when the games are slowly evolving into that like action period. It's all action paced, but it's still kind of scary. And then this is the eventually push into their death that they have. They get to action and then they just don't become scary anymore. It's just all like really bad like schlop. But in 2004, Resident Evil 4. What a quinky dink. I wrote where's everyone going? Bingo? Because that stars our blonde bombshell, Leon Kennedy. 2009, Resident Evil 5 is fear-mongering Ebola before the 2016 Olympics featuring Chris Redfield punching a boulder. And then in 2012, Resident Evil 6, which in my opinion is that has to be like the worst game in the franchise. I have so much resentment towards that game, but I wrote, Mr. President, the zombies at the second tower. Then we have phase 3. It's just like it's just all, this one I dubbed the shit period, when it's just all porta potty poopy and terrible. So from 2011 to 2015, Resident Evil, like the 2 Resident Evil Revelations games came out, and those ones brought back, so another tangent, the original games had the Resident Evil title sequence, and then it died, and then Revelations brought that back. And I remember like playing these games as a kid, maybe as a kid, but I like saw that and I'm like, oh cool, that's interesting. And then I learned that it died and I'm like, what the fuck, why wasn't this always the thing? But this is the height of female objectification in gaming, and also it happens on a boat for some reason. The second one happens on a boat. I don't know what happens in the first one, to be honest. And then this one's like a broader period of time, but it just shows how dog-ass the franchise went, is from 2002 to 2016. Those really bad Resident Evil movies that I talked about. What I have written down is like, I don't even want to talk about this. Like, they're just like, some of them are like, oh, it's so bad it's good, especially the one with like Nemesis, because like the special effects art looks like, it looks really, he does look like a botched penis surgery. It looks really bad. And then some of them are just like really boring. Like, I heard the 2016 one was like the last one that came out, and I heard that one was just like so far away from the franchise, didn't even make sense, and it was just so ungodly boring. And then the final phase, which is the phase that we're in right now, is the Renaissance period, the remake time. So 2017, this is not a remake, but this was kind of like the rebirth, like the phoenix coming from its ashes. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. It was called Biohazard, which is another reason why it gets confusing, because it's called Biohazard in Japan, so Biohazard, whatever. But this brought new character, new, like, context, new infection, new whatever. It's so cool. And it takes place in Sweet Home Alabama. And then from 2019 to 2023, a whole slew of remakes, remasters, re-envisions came out, from the remaster of Resident Evil 2, 3, and 4. It's just the first games, but longer download time. And then 2021, this was the most recent, no, Resident Evil 4 Remake was the most recent installment, but this was the most recent original, like, main franchise thing that wasn't a remake or whatever, is Resident Evil Village. It's basically about how a baby gets pickled, and then there's that long, sexy lady with a big bosom, and she gets tickled, and then a faceless man gets faux chivaled. And then, now I just wanted, like, there's so many fucking, like, characters and monster types or whatever, but I just wanted, there's a handful of important characters that just, like, run through the franchise. There's Jill Sandwich, Chris Redfield, who has, like, body dysmorphia basically throughout the games because the devs aren't consistent with how he looks at all. There's Wesker, Albert Wesker. He's like emo Neo from the Matrix, but like red-pilled and worse. And then there's Leon Kennedy, the love of my life, the flame of my groin. There's Claire Redfield. She's the sister to Chris, and she's kind of just like woman number 2. She, like, in my opinion, doesn't really have any character to her. There's Ada Wong. She's the obligatory mysterious badass mommy. And then there's Ethan Winters, who's I'm gonna get to this in a second, but I hate him so much. He just has no character, and he's, like, supposed to be a Joe Schmo, and I get it, but, like, I don't know, he just really annoys me. But now, the whole reason of this podcast is basically me just, like, Rachel Bryo, specifically, okay, why do you care? Like, Lily, you've been sitting here for God knows how long. Why the fuck should I listen? So, there's multiple horror themes and settings used throughout the franchise and the games that just all blend together in such a interesting way, even though the themes itself and settings itself are extremely polarizing. Like, they seem to contrast and conflict a lot. Like, for example, Resident Evil 1 is this, like, haunted, it looks like a haunted mansion on top of a mountainside. It's, like, all gothic architecture, I don't know art, so I probably got that wrong. But at the same time, you think this would be like, oh, vampires, ghosts. No, it's a zombie outbreak with a whole bunch of different zombie mutated monsters, and this mansion is sitting on top of a secret underground laboratory, which is all, like, sci-fi horror. And sci-fi horror really contrasts both visually and, I guess, like, plot-wise with, like, gothic romantic horror. But yet, the way they write the plot for these games, it just seems to blend and mix so well. And they do a similar thing with Resident Evil 2 and 3. They take place in Raccoon City. They have the police department. It's one of the main setting pieces. And it's this, the police department used to be an old art museum. So it has this beautiful marble architecture, whole bunch of like puzzle art themes. It's taking place in a post-apocalyptic zombie city, which I guess like this one kind of makes a little bit more sense. And throw it again, there's another evil underground science lab, which is a whole... It makes a little bit more sense with those games because then like the pharmaceutical company has a big say on the town and the police force. But I just think it's so interesting that they take these very different themes and they blend it together in such a new way that it makes it just like a new thing. And then some other common like horror tropes I see, especially with like Resident Evil 4, there's the cult. Like there's definitely a lot of cult imagery, cult themes in a small village town. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, that kind of has that southern Texas chainsaw horror slaughter movie, like gore motif and archetype. And then Resident Evil Village kind of combines Victorian Gothic and medieval into like castles and villages, and then also has industrial elements. And like all of this is also under the umbrella of zombies games. Every single game in these franchises all include zombies, all include infections, and they have such a vast palette of horror archetypes and themes that it's just so interesting. These archetypes like the machines, the destroyed labs, zombies, experiments, post-apocalyptic, and so on, they all just blend together in such an interesting way that each plot of the game explains the context for why they're layering these settings. But even if they don't, and you don't understand like the plot itself and you just play it, it still seems natural in a way for it working together. And to move on, I also want to talk about Resident Evil has like really interesting monster design. It has very unique monster design, not just for the like it's when you think Resident Evil, you think of some of the most iconic monsters like the Lickers, which is what the name sounds like, but the Lickers and the Cerberuses, the zombie dogs, and then the bosses, of course. And then I just pointed out some of the main reasons why the design is so iconic. Like the starting the scale is like just easiness and laziness. Is that like an example is they just make animals bigger and deadlier. Like especially in the first game, they have zombie sharks and zombie infected snakes, and they're just bigger and deadlier. But then they go from this classic zombie, which you see a lot. You see the classic zombie a lot from Infection, to how these infections and viruses mutate the zombie slowly into different variants, like the Crimson Heads, eventually into the Lickers or the Hunters. And it's just extremely iconic and unique the way they come up with these monster design, especially because it adds variety for gameplay reasons, but it also is just, it's just pretty to the eyes. And especially with the boss design, they definitely use a lot of clever metamorphosis versions of an enemy. So like for example, like Birkin and Nemesis, you see them first and they're like first original form, and eventually throughout the game the virus infecting their bodies mutates them more and more and more, that they just become more grotesque the longer you play the game until you beat them in their final form. And this could be due to like environmental factors or like I said, just the virus. And they do the same thing but with like incorporating human-like features. Like they did that with like Wesker, his boss fight in Resident Evil 5. He just starts being like really strong and really fast because he has the virus boosting him, but then he has his human form and he can use like these girls' little tentacles to attack people because of the virus. But this also goes with a sad thing that I definitely do see in gaming a lot, is the common trope of the giant yellow eyeball weak spot. This has like plagued Resident Evil since day one. Almost, I could think of like almost like I can count maybe so many bosses on my hand that have the giant glowing eyeball as a weak spot. And this is like, it's just kind of lazy now at that point, because so many different games, whether they're horror games or not, use that as like a boss weak spot, and it's just so lazy. Like, you need to come up with something new. Either the giant yellow eyeball or the open heart. That's another common one I see. Like, you just gotta, it just gets rinse and repeat, and it just gets old. And then the last major point I want to talk about, I kind of touched on earlier, is about what makes an iconic protagonist so iconic for the Resident Evil franchise, and then what makes them fumble so bad. And I compare this with my personal favorite, Leon S. Kennedy, and to Ethan Winters, which I already explicitly stated that I don't like him. But what makes Leon such an iconic protagonist in the cultural zeitgeist, not even just to me, it's like people who barely know like video games or like barely know the franchise, is that he's just like has these like really corny one-liners. He's so early 2000s core coded, vibey. It's just like his haircut, his style is so like very early 2000s. The way he talks, his body language is early 2000s. He has these like corny, cheesy one-liners that at the time were so like early 2000s. Like, you do a backflip after like shooting a zombie in the head, and you say, "Yeah, that's hasta luego for you, buddy." And it would make the whole, everyone would be like, "This is cinema, this is the peak of cinema, this is fucking awesome, this is epic, he's literally me." And then with Ethan Winters, when they rebooted the franchise, brought fresh air in like 2016, 2017 with him, he also went the route of like corny, cheesy one-liners, but he just I don't know, I just don't fuck with it. I just think it's just so half-baked, I guess that's the way you could put it. It just seems like with Leon, not only is it better with Leon because you've like known through the franchise, is more iconic than Ethan, but when he's known as being like a cop, a military member, he's strong, he's athletic, he's got that superhero. Whereas Ethan is like a Joe Schmo, and the reason why they made him a Joe Schmo is so it's easier for the player to project themselves onto him and put themselves and be more involved in the actual game and scares, which is really effective. But then it just like when you're like, say if I went to a disheveled house in the backwaters of Louisiana and it's black, nothing works, and then I'm running away from a giant mold monster that wants to eat me, and then I finally figure out how to kill it with a flamethrower, and you go, "Yeah, that one's gonna burn, that one's gonna leave a mark," and like I turn around and look in the camera and wink, like, it could be funny, but it's funny because you're cringing at it. You're laughing at it, not with it. Whereas Leon, with the iconic "Where'd everybody go? Bingo" line, it's so bad, it's so good, they're just like, oh, he could get away with it because he's cool. Whereas Ethan, like, he's just not cool. That's the whole sum of what I'm talking about. Ethan's just not cool. He's just not cool. He's fucking lame. I don't know. I got a bone to pick with Ethan Winters. It's just the charm scale, basically. It's just, you just don't care at all for Ethan. I've never once even... Resident Evil 7 was my first Resident Evil game, like my first exposure to the franchise. I did not give a shit for him at all, whether he got hurt or if his family got hurt or whatever. Did not care. Whereas Leon, if, like, especially when I see his close ones get hurt, or if he gets hurt, I'm just like, no. And this is even before I became obsessed with it. I'm like, damn, that's gonna hurt, or like, damn. I don't know. Anyways, to really just wrap everything up, Resident Evil's pretty cool. I think you should check it out. I think I did a very poor job explaining why Resident Evil's really cool, especially since there's just so many options. It's just really important for starting the popularity of the survival horror genre, and it implemented core gameplay mechanics, horror archetypes and settings that are either new or they mixed it up, old ones and made new ones, or just really emphasizing just old archetypes. And it kind of mainstreamed horror video games to multiple audiences. I would say it mainstreamed it in the States, at least. And everybody knows Resident Evil, even if you don't play video games that often. It's a very common name you can recognize now. So, yeah. If you dig this and you want to hear more, go to WIUX's website. Ew, I sound fucking 80 when I say webpage. Go to their website and go to listen, look for the podcast tab, or if you listen through Spotify, Apple, yeah, more to come. More will be posted on there. I also post on Newgrounds. If you aren't familiar with Newgrounds, there's a whole nother rabbit hole, but I post podcasts there too. If you want to stay up to date on new episodes, info, whatever, or if you have any suggestions or ideas of games I should talk about and want to stay up to date on all that, go follow me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Newgrounds, at survivethis.wiux. And yeah, I just want to say once again, thank you to WIUX for the assistance, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. I know it's probably cringy to hear a woman, burn her, she's a witch. It's probably just weird to hear someone talk about video games, but I really do appreciate you stopping by and listening and hearing me rant. And yeah, I hope you can survive so I can see you next time.